Today's video is the first in a series of setting up your miter saw. We're going to take this DeWalt 718 12-inch saw, which I used as my framing saw, and tune it up and turn it into a finished saw. In this video series, we will go through every step to get your miter saw performing at its best, no matter what brand you have. To get the most out of any tool, it has to be set up right and accurately. So let's look at what we're dealing with.
Starting with the table, it's 10 thousandths out. That's quite a bit. Next, the lower fence, checking straightness, which wasn't too bad, but the left fence had 2 thousandths dip at the end, which we'll be fixing in the miter saw fence video. Now the lower fence square test, which was good within 1 thousandths. The trick will be to keep it square while adjusting the table. And last, the upper fences. These were 4 thousandths out, so we'll have some work there in the fence video.
Well, you can see we have a fair bit of work to do. This video will cover the first step, which is flattening the miter table. Because the fences register off the table, we need to set it first. There are two parts to the table assembly. The rotating miter table, which is the cut reference and the most important part, and second, the support wings. It's important to get the miter table flat first, then check the support wings. You don't want to try and adjust them all at the same time because you don't have a flat reference to work off yet. Let's take a quick look at why we're flattening the table. An unflat table doesn't really affect the horizontal squaring cut, it affects the vertical squaring cut. The horizontal cut references off the fence and the vertical cut off the table. Making a perfect cut requires both the horizontal and vertical cuts to be square and straight. But it's important to know which plane affects which cut, because sometimes you have to tweak a cut to fit properly. Here are the tools you'll need. A calibrated straight edge. This is important that your straight edge is actually straight. So don't use a level or a framing square. The more accurate the tool, the more accurate the saw will be. You'll also need a quality square, feeler gauges, a marker, and a random orbital sander with a hard pad, and some sandpaper. I like to use 100 grit. So let's get started.
Let's start by removing the upper and lower fences. Here you can see DeWalt has made a registration stop for the fence. This is a nice feature and will help set up the saw. Next, remove the throat plate. We'll be making a custom plate in an upcoming video. Here's a look at the pivot screw for the rotating table and a look at how it rotates around the base. Time to check the miter table. Getting this flat is the first and most important step. I start by checking front to back, then side to side.
Wow, so we really got lucky on this table here because it's almost perfectly flat. And that doesn't happen too often. But that's good news because now all we have to do is adjust the wings. And these are not as important as the table. The fact that the table is perfectly flat is awesome. These two wings we now need to adjust, get them level with the table, and they can even be slightly lower. 1/2 thousandths of an inch is okay, because sometimes this edge of the wing is actually lower than the table from the manufacturer, and you don't want to take the table and try to bring it down to that edge. If this is good, that's the most important thing. Then we'll bring these to match the table surface, but if it's slightly lower, that's okay. It's not going to affect our cut. Because I didn't get to show flattening the table itself, I'm going to bring another saw in so you can see that procedure. Let's do that.
Again, I'm going to start front to back, then side to side, marking any high spots with a permanent marker. The marker not only shows you where to remove material, but gives you a gauge of how much material you're removing. This is a very important and systematic step. Don't sand anything but the high spots until they are all removed, or you'll create a lot of extra work. Now sand out the permanent marker and recheck. This will give you a gauge as to how much your sander is removing. Just like wood, you need to keep the sander flat and use light, even pressure. The metal sands a lot slower than wood, and with an orbital sander you can easily sand flat within 1/1000th. Okay, now we're talking. With proper technique and a systematic approach, I got this table within 1/1000th. I don't recommend sanding by hand. If you've ever tried to sand metal by hand, you know it's a ridiculously slow process. With a light touch and good sanding technique, you can easily get quality results with an orbital sander. Okay, back to the DeWalt. Remember when we started, there was a 10/1000th gap. We are going to use the same procedure. Identify and mark the high spots, sand out the marker, and recheck. After the first round, we've removed 5/1000ths, halfway there. 10/1000ths is a lot of material to remove, so it will take a few passes. I got both wings even and flat, so all I had to do was mark up each wing, sand out the marker, and repeat. This took quite a few passes to get it all the way down. If you have a lot of material to remove and have an aggressive direct drive sander like the Bosch GET75 or the Festool RO150, they will get the job done quickly. Just make sure you stay flat. Moment of truth. Time to check the miter table. Do this in the 90-degree position and swing the table all the way in both directions 10 degrees at a time, checking that the miter table is flat with the wings. Like I mentioned earlier, the wings being a couple thousandths lower than the table is perfectly okay and helps adjust for any out of level in the miter rotation.
Okay, step one of setting up your saw is done. Now that the table is flat, we can move on to the fences. So stay tuned for the next video, hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time.